Some relatively new research from two studies, public health nutrition and circulation, really do illustrate why we have a belly fat, abdominal fat, and visceral fat problem, especially in the United States. The answer is pretty simple, but we're also going to have to unpack why it's simple and what we can do to sort of reverse this or at least combat the problem. So let's go ahead and talk about this first study. This was a large study published in Public Health Nutrition, took a look at 10 countries, okay, and it took a look at 23,000 women and 13,000 men. This study was looking at various regions of Europe and when they ate. So check this out. The Mediterranean regions typically ate overall the bulk of their food slightly later in the day. Now, you're probably wondering, first of all, what does this have to do with belly fat? Or secondly, I know where this is going. They ate later, so it was unhealthy. No, there's a serious plot twist with this. Okay, the Northern European countries, they ended up eating the bulk of their food earlier in the day. What was strangely unique is that the Mediterranean regions, although they ate the bulk of their food shifted later, most of their calories were earlier. And don't worry, I have a serious point with this because we're going to talk about something that's really wild with the US. Okay, so what they found is that even though they were starting their eating a little later, their first meal, almost like a quasi, somewhat pseudo fasting style, intermittent fasting style, but not really. That first meal was the largest, and then they tapered as the day went on. Okay, we know that's viable and valuable because the Mediterranean regions, say what you want about them, whether you like that kind of diet or not, they do have some of the best cardiometabolic health in the world, some of the healthiest mitochondrial function, and basically they are very healthy people. But now we look at the United States and we look at this study that was published in Circulation. Flippin' flabbergasted by this. It was unreal. So they tried doing a similar thing. When do people eat most of their calories? When do they eat? There were no recognizable patterns because the only time Americans were not eating was between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. Other than that, it was like 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. redlined the entire day. Couldn't even recognize patterns because Americans eat around the clock, never giving their body an actual break. Okay, I could bore you with gory details on how eating late at night is not good for your circadian rhythm. I get that. I've talked about that. I'm not going to beat that into the ground anymore. Actually, I will. Eating later in the day is bad for your circadian rhythm. It is bad for sleep. It is clearly bad for metabolic health. Don't do it. Try to eat earlier in the day and stack your calories. But I also have a way that you can get around this, but we need to talk about why constantly eating is bad. We consistently eat and never give ourselves a break from food. And this is problematic on so many levels. One, we disassociate from hunger. We don't understand what hunger is. So when we do get hungry, we feel like we need to eat. Newsflash, when you're hungry, you don't need to eat. I was just talking to Michael Easter, who's the author of The Comfort Crisis. We were talking about this yesterday. And it's like, hunger doesn't come and then get worse and worse and worse and worse. Hunger comes in waves. And it's a quick cue to say, hey, remember, food needs to be on your mind. But when you consider yourself like constantly fueled, the moment that you take away that, you've enabled yourself. You're gonna get hungry. But here's the problem. We have chronically high levels of insulin. So we are never giving ourselves a chance to actually tap into our stored body fat. Let's think about this for a second. You have a sink, and the sink is filled with food that you need to hit the garbage disposal on. Okay, when you finally get the garbage disposal to drain all the food, you finally start burning fat. But think about it. Some food starts to go down the garbage disposal and then you're just adding more in. You're never actually allowing yourself to really burn fat when you're consistently adding calories on top of calories on top of calories on top of insulin on top of insulin on top of insulin. You also never give yourself a chance to have your gut get a break. Your gut does need to rest. Okay, when you look at evidence with gut health, one of the biggest things, one of the biggest pillars that's looked at is your gut motility. And gut motility improves when you take a break from food. It allows your gut a chance to repair. Okay. Now, when we're eating all the time, it also is reverse causation and illustrates where we have problems. If people were eating enough protein, if people were eating enough fiber, if people were stimulating GLP-1 activation, glucagon-like peptide 1, we wouldn't need to eat all the time because there wouldn't be a need to. It's very clear that we are eating foods that are calorically dense, hyper palatable, and just make us hungry again really soon. So when we reverse engineer the process is when we learn a lot. What I recommend you do is, yes, do start your day with a larger meal, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Do try to get 40 or 50% of your calories from protein. Do get more fiber. I went ahead, I put a link down below for something that I do recommend. Yes, they are a sponsor on this channel. I am disclosing that 100%. But when it comes to appetite, when it comes to not wanting to eat round the clock, it is full stop something that makes a big difference. It's the SunWarrior Active Line protein powders. Now, you don't have to do this, but I'm being real. It's a higher fiber, high protein, also has probiotics and digestive enzymes in it. So it is what I use to get a bunch of protein in, even though this one is particularly plant-based. And trust me, I love my meat, but I'm just real here. It is a plant-based protein powder that keeps me so satiated that I can pattern interrupt a lot of situations. If I feel like I just want to eat all the time, I have one of those shakes and it kills my appetite. Not to mention, it is high protein. They do really put their minds to work when they combine the right kinds of aminos to make a very good quality complete protein that is good, especially for an active person. So that link down below is a 20% off discount link for SunWarrior's Active Line, but also gets you 20% off whatever else you want from them. Okay, whether it's going to be their Warrior Blend, whether it's their standard, whether it's their pre-workout, whatever you want from them. So use that link, top line of the description underneath this video. The other thing, when you're constantly eating all the time, you're never giving your mitochondria a chance to learn how to use fat as well. Now, it's going to know how to use fat. That's obviously an exaggeration, but there is such a thing as fat adaptation. And this comes with occasionally being hungry because the mitochondria has to learn how to shuttle fats in to use those as fuel much easier. This is hugely important, namely for visceral fat. Chronically high levels of insulin, chronic just food consumption and never taking a break and never allowing fat adaptation, that could definitely lead to more visceral fat accumulation. That could also lead to more body fat accumulation, particularly around the abdomen, because that's where we tend to store it when we are cardiometabolically unhealthy. So why do we have a belly fat problem in the United States? Because we never stop eating. And it's not just calories. There is more to it than that. There has to be. Calories are king because it's what we know the most about and it's what we can default to. But we all do know, most researchers know that there are other interplays there. Check out this research. This was published in Clinical Nutrition and it was 2,050 participants. And this tells us basically when we may want to eat. And it's going to be a cool little hack for you. They found a direct correlation, tight correlation with the more calories that were in the evening, the higher the BMI, the higher the body fat. The more calories that came in with a lunch, the lower the body fat, the lower the BMI. Eat a bigger lunch. A lot of times we don't eat a big lunch because we don't want to feel foggy throughout the rest of the day. I get that. But you know what else is going to make you feel foggy? Being really overweight and unhealthy. I would rather take a short-term pitfall than a long-term just destroying aspect. It's not always easy to eat a big breakfast. You roll out of bed, you're on the go, you need to eat something. I get it. Have something high protein, grab some cottage cheese. If it's low calorie, not the end of the world. But have a big lunch. A trick for me is I do have the bulk of my calories, probably either with breakfast or on a lot of days with lunch. And I have my lunch at like 1 p.m. where I'm still kind of not that hungry around 5 or 6 p.m. and I don't want a giant dinner. I want something small and simple and high protein. And that way, most of my calories are, well, starting fairly high in breakfast, really high with lunch, and then tapering dramatically with dinner. And I sleep better and the evidence is strong. As a matter of fact, the study that I referenced before has a quote, literally, epidemiological findings suggest a potential detrimental effect of late meals on cardiometabolic health. Cardiometabolic health also has to do with central adiposity, has to do with high BMI and being overweight. The interesting thing is that this clinical nutrition study that I mentioned most recently, it showed that eating lunch was not just better for BMI, but it was also protective against a high BMI. So it offered cardiometabolic just benefit. It's such a simple thing to do. Okay, you're in a hurry in the morning. Grab something light, that's fine. But don't be afraid to have a big lunch. You're not gonna look like a glutton if you have a double burger patty with a little bit of cheese and some avocado. No one's gonna make fun of you, especially when you go home and you're like, you know what, I just want something simple and something light. The Europeans are doing it right. Okay, they're allocating their calories earlier in their feeding window, but they're also kind of intermittent fasting. They're taking long periods of time for their gut to rest and digest, and they have very clear and defined eating times and patterns, and believe it or not, very clear sleeping patterns to boot. I'll see you tomorrow.